No, you know what? Screw this. I'm gonna need something stronger. Cut. So, Last Jedi. There are those in the Critics Guild who believe that Star Wars films are inherently reactionary, that the original trilogy ended an era of American film, the so-called New Hollywood era, that at least tried to make movies with some degree of relevance to the society that created them and the times in which they were created. While Star Wars is about weird space aliens fighting a bullshit war in another galaxy. Please ignore the fact that not even a decade after the US lost the Vietnam War, Star Wars comes along to tell the story of a ragtag group of rebels from across its galaxy's socioeconomic classes and racial backgrounds, uniting to defeat a technologically superior empire ruled by creepy old white dudes who think they can predict the future. But there are some things you can predict. And since this is our third time around the bend, we should all know how these things go by now. The middle film in a Star Wars trilogy is always the more character-focused entry, with the downer ending, where someone gets their hand chopped off. It usually has a clearer vision, and a more forward-moving plot than the other two, and it usually does its director's career no favors whatsoever. Irving Kershner hasn't done a damn thing since RoboCop 2. Though that's probably RoboCop 2's fault. The hellish tales of that production make even the Disney Star Wars franchise, even now, at this late of a date, look like a well-oiled machine. And as for old Georgie boy, well, we know what happened to him. At least Rian Johnson made Brick, and nobody can take that away from him. Brick is good, folks. Go see it if you haven't. Looper's okay too. Unless, of course, you're one of those time travel pedants who can't get it up unless your movie's plot requires you to make a flowchart. I haven't seen Brothers Bloom or Knives Out, so no comment. But by now, I've seen quite a few hungry young indie directors swallowed up and digested by the studio system. Josh Trank, Gareth Edwards, the poor bastard who did Kong, Skull Island, Jordan... I've already forgotten how to pronounce his last name. God damn it, I'm sorry, Jordan. Somebody better put some protection around Ann Boden and Ryan Fleck, the co-directors of Captain Marvel. Assuming it's not already too late. Nowadays, whenever I watch the latest bumper crop of indie films roll out of the festival circuit, I always get the sinking sensation that at least one, if not more, of their directors will be helming a big-name franchise within the next year or 5. And they'll spend months doing pre-release press junkets, saying some version of, why yes, growing up, watching, insert franchise name here, I always dreamed I'd eventually get to direct one. Then the movie will come out, and that dream will quickly turn into a waking nightmare. 9 times out of 10. Partially because, during the 2010s, we all got fooled into thinking that joining Twitter would be a good idea. A necessary step on our path to success, whatever that means, in a world where our dreams can so often turn into waking nightmares that drive us to drink. Or worse. Practically, these days, success means that everyone gets to be their own PR agent, in a world where anyone can yell at you at any time, for any reason. And your multi-billion-dollar corporate employers will do absolutely nothing about it. They won't even have the decency to say, fuck you, your contract work. Hell, they seem to like it whenever their employees get into flame wars on public feeds. Or straight up delete their accounts because they're sick of the abuse. From a cold, calculating machine standpoint, controversy, a nice blanket term that covers everything from polite disagreement to open, continuous death threats, equals attention, and attention equals mo money. And when all you care about, When all you're legally allowed to care about under our current system is making all of the money in the world, then you don't have to give a shit about anything at all, really. I imagine it's quite freeing in its own psychopathic way. Like Benicio del Toro says to Finn about halfway through this picture, "It's a machine, partner. Live free. Don't join." Hard as it is to believe now, the hype train for Star Wars, Episode 8 - The Last Jedi was already running at ludicrous speed before Episode 7 even left theaters. Powered by rampant speculation over all the various threads that J.J. Abrams intentionally left dangling off of his life's work. Just who were Rey's parents? Who the fuck is this Snoke guy, and where the hell did he even come from? What's Luke Skywalker been up to all this time, as blinkered neo-fascism has once again risen to threaten the galaxy anew? And what the hell happened to turn the son of Solo and Organa to the dark side anyway? The Last Jedi takes the stance that only two of these questions actually matter, and this counts as a bold subversion of expectations in a blinkered neo-fascist country like mine. Leading the reactionary shithead anti-fans of Star Wars to turn expectations subverted into what they call a meme, when what they really mean is a thought-terminating cliché. But fuck them. Alright? Sick of talking about them. Fuck them and fuck what they like. You know what we should do? We should do what they do with everything we care about, and just list off all of their complaints in the most snide, dismissive tone of voice that we can muster. Because if there's anything that years of watching YouTube videos has taught me, it's that when you say something in a snide, dismissive tone of voice, that makes it just instantly disappear. Like that one knife that this guard is holding disappears between shots. Ooh, continuity error in a Star Wars fight scene, because we know that's never happened before. New force powers, because these movies should be just like McDonald's Happy Meals. The same shit every time or people riot. Rose Tycho, Laura Dern, and her purple hair. And the fact she's the only one who acts like an admiral on this boatload of children, to quote another sci-fi admiral of my acquaintance. Low-speed space chase. Concerns about space fuel. Okay, I am actually curious why this film and its immediate successor are just completely obsessed with space fuel suddenly. But if there's anything looking into Solo has taught me, it's that the answer is probably really dumb and will make me dumber for finding out. So, well, that was fun. Now, let's talk about why I actually liked this one a hell of a lot more than its predecessor, or successors for that matter, and why it might in fact be the only good Disney Star Wars movie to date. Principally, that's because it pulled the same kind of crass emotional manipulation on me that R2-D2 tries to pull on Luke in order to bring him out of retirement. And this is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. We want our art to affect us, yes? At least theoretically, right? And in an era where the vast majority of pop art leaves you feeling some species of meh, we should celebrate a piece of art affecting us whenever it happens. This does not mean we cannot criticize the way it goes about affecting us. Especially not if that way bugs us more and more with each subsequent rewatch. As with Force Awakens, The Last Jedi's primary method of affecting its audience is by echoing stuff we've already seen in the Star Wars franchise. You see, it's like poetry, they rhyme, to quote a sage. Instead of referencing old sci-fi serials, or the old samurai films that helped extend the Western genre's lifespan, modern Star Wars is in the hands of people who grew up with apparently no reference base outside of Star Wars. And maybe Rashomon. So, okay, that's one old samurai flick. There's a few more. Call me when they start referencing 13 Assassins. Either of them. Just as Force Awakens was clearly a remake of New Hope disguised as a sequel, The Last Jedi is a remake of both Empire and Return of the Jedi, disguised as a sequel to all 7 previous films. By a corporation that is hubristic enough to think it can predict the future, but is at least smart enough to know that if they did just straight up remake Star Wars, people probably would actually riot. I mean, hope springs eternal after all. As I've aged, I've started going back and forth on whether Empire or Return of the Jedi is my favorite. And I know I'm not alone, because this movie does exactly the same thing. Sometimes Return is my favorite, because that's where all the dramatic tension of the series finally resolves itself in a series of big explosions, both literal and emotional. It's where the evil wizard is undone by his own hubris after hauling the Force-sensitive protagonist before him, thinking he's got everything all sewn up. Sometimes Empire's my favorite. Not because it has the better ending, as some depressive motherfuckers might have it, but because it has the better structure. The Force-sensitive main character goes off to have a training montage with some old fart, while the normie characters are forced, har, thanks to the temporary but dramatic intimacy of a chase movie, to interact with few people but themselves. And maybe some random character who will suddenly but inevitably betray them. They come up with a plan to extract themselves from their chase movie, and it fails miserably, forcing the Force-sensitive main character to save their asses at the 11th hour, preferably after a lightsaber fight. Once again, I'd have to try a lot harder than I just did to graft the plot of Empire onto, say, Attack of the Clones. And that's my major criticism with this episode, just like it was last time. Not only is it too referential to the originals, it's too eager to please. People can recognize this eagerness, and because our society is a society of cutthroat, bloodthirsty sociopaths, some people hate this movie for it. Even I kind of hate it sometimes. But it's like hating on small children or cute fuzzy animals. You know, I can't maintain the hate. I'd never cut it as a Sith. Speaking of which, this film opens up literal hours after Force Awakens' end, as the Resistance evacuates in their moment of triumph, and Rey discovers that Luke Skywalker has become a grumpy old man. No time to deal with the fallout of the First Order's preemptive strike against... what was that planet's fucking name again? God, the happiest moment I had with this new trilogy was when I thought they'd actually destroyed Coruscant. Hard to take a bolder anti-prequel stance than that. Oh, did you make a series of movie reviews that are longer than the movies themselves? How cute. We turned the setting of 75% of the prequel trilogy into a cloud of superheated vapor. Beat that, motherfucker, the film seemed to say. Or I imagined the film was saying at the time, because I was totally projecting. I'll cop to it. That one's on me, not JJ. Plenty enough to blame JJ Abrams for. We don't have to... Yes, that one's mine. I can own that one. Because no, it turned out that that was just a planet that looked astonishingly similar to Coruscant. The Hosnian system. Oh joy. See, that's been a problem with Star Wars for a while now. If you don't know your way around Wikipedia, you might as well not even bother trying to keep up with current events. Most people don't, and so they find themselves easily lost in the plots of these so-called children's films. "You're not Vader," Supreme Leader Snoke says to Kylo Ren early on. You're just a child in a mask. Ah, but what was Vader? Did the prequels not contend that he was still a child when the Emperor put him in his mask? Was that not what made all of the anti-fans shout betrayal 15 years ago? But the dark side has an ultimately self-defeating habit of recruiting angry man-babies to its cause and putting them in masks. Just like the light side has an equally self-defeating habit of running away from all of the galaxy's real problems. And depending on how much extended Star Wars universe material you've consumed, you're aware that this has been a problem for either the last 50 or the last 1,000 in-universe years. The other problem with Star Wars is, if you don't read the tie-in merchandise, you'll miss critical pieces of backstory that these films may or may not assume you know. Par exemple, that book I mentioned back in the Force Awakens review, Bloodlines, set about 5 to 10 years before Force Awakens opens up, reveals that General Leia's political career completely flamed out after the revelation that she was not, in fact, the daughter of Bail Organa, former senator and founding member of the Alliance to Restore the Republic, but was instead the bio-daughter of Darth Vader, notorious mass-murdering, planetary population-enslaving psychopath. Her brother Luke's character was also assassinated on the floor of the new Senate, and someone, 3 someones I'm thinking about in particular, neglected to inform their son-nephew Padawan of his illustrious/ignominious heritage until it became public record. Gee, I think it sure would be nice to see any of this referenced on screen, don't you? Might help the film paint its villain in the sympathetic light that it so clearly wants to paint him in, and make things easier on the shippers. Not the Rey-Finn shippers, of course. Or the Finn-Poe shippers, God help you. But shout out to all you Reylos out there. You got a fraction of a second where she grabs his thigh. Ooh. And a whole movie where you're chosen to get to angry flirt through the Force. Including this bit, where Rey calls him a monster, and he responds, "Yes, I am," in what I'm sure is meant to be his most manly man voice. Then Kylo has to wipe some water off of his face. Now, I don't want to get all Freudian on you. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but sometimes obvious metaphors are obvious. Yes, Virginia, we've officially entered the oral stage. And you all better buckle up, because some of you are not gonna like what stage comes next. In most fictions, once you kill the evil emperor, the story ends and everybody goes home. Well, not really, but that's just the idea that's been transmitted down to us by adaptation decay, since nobody seems to actually get to the end of Lord of the Rings. Aw, they say in protest, but that's the depressing bit, where you realize you can't go home again after an epic quest. Meanwhile, in this galaxy, reactionary shitheads have always been, and probably will always be with us. They like to grow and gather strength in the darker corners of our society, getting each other angrier and angrier until one of them does something stupid. Afterwards, they always fall to denial and infighting, before scattering to even darker corners of society where the cycle can repeat itself all over again. As Star Wars grew to conquer all forms of mass media, it gradually wove this unfortunate fact about our reality into the fabric of its universe. Hence the seemingly eternal war between the light and dark sides of the Force. Again, to quote the Del Toro, and I'm not even going to pretend he has some different in-universe name. They blow you up today, you blow them up tomorrow. It's just business. Some people hate the fact Luke Skywalker became a bitter old man between trilogies, but I embrace him as an icon and an avatar of our bitter old man age. It's clear to me that during his travels to find students who weren't his blood relatives, he recovered enough galactic history to discover the Jedi's fatal flaw, and the fatal flaw of the Republic that they served. And surprise, surprise, just like Palpatine, it was hubris. Though outsourcing the galactic guardianship of peace and justice to an order of prudish warrior monks was probably a bad idea in the first place. Just putting that out there. I'd even go one further to suggest that Luke has read the Old Republic comic books, or whatever their in-universe equivalents might be, the sacred Jedi text. And you know what? Some of them actually were page-turners, Yoda. Shut your damn fool mouth. Luke knows now that the Jedi and Sith have been trapped in a false dichotomy for the last 1,000 generations, created by their own self-defeating ideologies, which in turn only exist to justify the two orders' monopolization of the Force. But as he says to young Rey, the Force is not a power you have, and it never was. It's something that gives power to you. To anyone sensitive enough to feel it. The Jedi's complicity in concealing this truth is why it's time for the Jedi to end. A phrase some of the gray Jedi of yore might have gladly gotten on board with. Oh God, do I have to explain who the gray Jedi were now? Like any band of apostates from a hierarchical religious order that lasted as long as the Jedi did, they never really had a united, coherent ideology of their own. In consequence, most of them wound up swallowed by either one side of the eternal battle or the other. Like how Benicio betrays Rose and Finn as soon as they get caught. Try not joining a side all you want, you'll eventually be forced to pick one by someone who has real power. And who wields the most power in the Star Wars galaxy? Is it the pack of fascist losers who keep wasting all of their resources on planet-killing lasers? Or using armies to settle their personal family feuds? Is it the people who oppose said fascist losers? Or is it the people selling all these high-tech weapons while they sit back and enjoy their space champagne? Yes, we're talking about Canto Bight, and the Canto Bight sequence should be the most important one in the film. So, of course, a great many of my fellow Americans revile it and consider it pointless. Even the film it's in kind of does as well. It's a great big cul-de-sac in the plot, to be sure. But it's a plot cul-de-sac that could have pointed the way forward for Star Wars if it stopped to think about its own implications for more than a moment. Most of the movies about the rich bastards who actually run our world are documentaries, a genre notorious for its lack of spaceships, explosions, and box office numbers. Unless you're Michael Moore. But then again, not even him anymore. Even those rarely deal with the people who keep the military-industrial complex spinning us all into an empty pit of endless wars and rumors of wars. Even I don't know all their names, and I am terminally online. Hell, the names change every time one of them gets a better job. I sometimes know the names of the politicians they're bribing, but those names change just as often, and for the same damn reason. Blow up all the starships you want. Hell, split them in half with your own in a light-speed kamikaze run. Won't make a damn bit of difference if the line of warship vendors stretches all the way out the door and into the nearest space casino. So The Last Jedi correctly diagnoses the problem with Star Wars. That it's trapped in an endless, ultimately pointless cycle of escalating violence, driven by the profit motive of people we rarely, if ever, see in these films. Unfortunately, as a consumer product, driven by the profit motive of people we rarely see outside the pages of Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, the only solution to this problem it can offer is more Star Wars. And not the way I might like, where Rose and Finn go back to Canto Bight with something that packs a little bit more punch than a herd of floppy-eared space horse bunnies. No, they mean more Star Wars in a way that will maintain maximum brand recognition. That's why these movies always wind up being about the eternal battle between the light and dark sides of the dang Force. Even though the thing everybody likes about Star Wars movies is that they appear to take place in a vast universe where theoretically anything could be happening at any damn time. Rose offers the only thing that could come close to a message for this picture, since all of the other messages it puts forth are put forth only to be summarily dismissed. Turns out, sometimes the Force is about lifting rocks. Sometimes old masters really will stride out and face down the entire First Order all by themselves. No, you shouldn't let the past die, and you think you have the power to kill it, you arrogant, zipper-faced dumbfuck? It isn't even past, and you couldn't even kill the daughter of 2 junk traders from what is pretty much nowhere. But anyway, turns out the light will apparently win, not by fighting what we hate, but by saving what we love. And, excuse me, but why not both? Like, sometimes you have to do both. Sometimes you have to do both at the same time. Sometimes you have to do the one in order to do the other, in a sequence. And that scares some people who'd prefer to only see fighting in fictional contexts. Hell, I'm right there with you. And I can't help you get over that fear. I can only say that the boundaries between reality and fiction have been breaking down for pretty much my entire lifetime, and fear is the path to the dark side. As we see here, Luke Skywalker's fear of history repeating itself brought about the very repeat of history that he sought to avoid in the first place. Textbook Greek tragedy stuff right there. All I gotta say to that is, mwah. Perfect. But you don't have to listen to me. What the hell do I know? I'm just your friendly neighborhood movie critic. I read Star Wars as a Vietnam War movie in space at the beginning of this ungodly rant. But from a filmatic... is that a word? From a filmmaking standpoint, Star Wars owes a great deal more to World War II. Or to stock footage of World War II shot by its various armies during the conflict. So to read it through that lens, we can think of the generation that fought the Clone Wars as the so-called greatest generation. Their children, who successfully fought and won a war against an evil galactic empire, were the boomers. Meaning, this sequel generation, their children, are the Generation X of Star Wars. Raised to believe they could change the world by people who actually did, only to be smacked in the face by their historical circumstances at pretty much every turn. Just like Adam raised a Cain, the Skywalker twins and Han Solo raised a Kylo Ren. And the only equal and opposite force, har har, to that is someone raised by the hardcore streets of Jakku, as far from the halls of galactic power as one can reasonably get. And just like the Xers in real life, she is herself a Star Wars fan, raised on the grand tales of Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess General Leia. Meaning she is bound to learn all of the wrong lessons from this, just like all the Xers did in real life. Or so it seems to me now, that the sequel to this film has come out and left us all a little bit more depressed than when we started. If I kept some kind of schedule and actually managed to do this last year, I could have ended things with at least some spark of hope, like the one the Resistance keeps talking about. I could have said something like, well, now that they've remade all 3 of the originals, at least the final entry in this trilogy will have room to do something original or creative. But, like I said in the Solo review, I'm sick of the kayfabe, including my own. So I ain't even gonna try and pretend. This may be the only good Disney Star Wars movie, but it's still depressingly meh. That's the best thing I can say about it, other than the fact that it did not actively piss me off. And is this really all we can expect from the 8th film in a franchise? Like, is this it? Is this all we get? Star Trek First Contact is the 8th film in its franchise. But then again, so's Jason Takes Manhattan. And Freddy vs. Jason. And Hellraiser Hellworld. The one with Lance Henriksen and Henry Cavill in it. By the 8th films in their respective franchise, James Bond was living and letting die, and Godzilla had become a single father. Star Wars is still holding on to its past, and it really should learn to let go. But with any luck, all of you have stopped caring, and you'll be too busy arguing over whether or how much I dissed all of the films that I just mentioned in the last bit here. They were literally the first 8th films that popped into my head while I was writing this, so don't read too much into it. Or, actually, no, read too much into it. I'm fully endorsing that. And add your own problematic faves down in the comments section. And that way, I can finally think about something other than Star Wars again. Until the next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like, share, and subscribe, as always. And if you really liked the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. Joining the ranks of my own little gray Jedi order. Which includes Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The After Movie Diner, and Stu G. Sorry this one was a little late. Yeah, I'm pretty burned out on Star Wars at this point. So, next time will be something completely different.